Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. Filip Hrgovic has again failed to impress against another southpaw, stopping Demsey McKean in the final round of their 12-round encounter on the undercard of the Joshua and Helenius card at the O2 in London. So this fight, it started to pick up for Hrgovic in the second round. He looked like he was starting to get on top of McKean. He even started to really land the right hand with authority in the third, and he was taking lumps out of the Australian. But it seemed that Hrgovic, the gas tank, the conditioning, something wasn't quite working because he went completely off the boil for rounds at a time and looked tired, he looked disinterested, and he didn't really sort of seem to have any adjustments or nuance in his game, kept trying to do the same old thing, and Demsey McKean was the one that was starting to make adjustments. And actually, you had a situation where I think there were a lot of close, low-volume rounds, about 4 or 5 to about 9 or 8, where Demsey McKean might have been nicking those rounds, and he seemed to gain in confidence as the fight wore on. After looking like he was in pretty bad shape after round 3, and the body language wasn't great, he grew into the fight, started landing some shots on Hrgovic, started to put together a few combinations, and arguably was winning some of those rounds. And then you had Filip Hrgovic hurting him in the 9th round, and then later in the final round, in overall what was a pretty pedestrian performance from both, actually, you had Demsey McKean, who was just hugging like there was no tomorrow. Hrgovic also guilty again of some behind the head shots, but McKean, maybe he was lucky that he wasn't getting a point deducted. But Hrgovic wasn't really working on the inside effectively. He wasn't able to nullify McKean, but then he landed a huge right hook in the final round, and he was able to follow up and just continue throwing shots to get the referee to jump in. So final round stoppage for Filip Hrgovic, and if this had been a 10-round fight, it probably would have been quite interesting if it went to the cards. Although, I mean, a lot of close rounds, a lot of low volume rounds. Who knows what it would have been like for 10 or the 12 rounds had this gone the distance tonight. So you have a situation, Filip Hrgovic again looks unimpressive in a performance. And remember, this is like an audition for the world title. He's defending the IBF mandatory. He is the mandatory challenger to the belt that Alexander Usyk holds. He will get that shot sooner rather than later. The IBF won't muck around. Remember, you've got a case that the WBA is being fought for, not so long, now until Usyk defends that against Daniel Dubois. The IBF will be next. So it could be at the end of the year or early 2024, and there's a shot there for Filip Hrgovic. Based on what we saw, people probably are not impressed. I wasn't impressed. You have a situation that Filip Hrgovic didn't seem to go through the gears. There was no levels, really wasn't a lot of adjustments, and the conditioning is a major red flag. He looked tired for multiple rounds, and if he wasn't tired, well, what's his explanation? A lot of one-off punching, not following the corner instruction. They were telling him to let his hands go, to work on the inside, not just to submit to the clinch that obviously Demsey McKean was bringing on. And you can argue, yeah, McKean was negative at times, but Hrgovic so too, and he was willingly accepting these clinches. And the inside game, obviously, it's a work in progress. I mean, I think the thing is, when you saw Filip Hrgovic a few years ago, especially after turning over, getting a bronze medal, a lot of hope about how far he could go. He had a good amateur career. He was one of the better amateurs around. His skills were regarded pretty, well. He'd been in training camps with the likes of David Haye and even Cut Haye, back in 2014. But it sort of seems like Hrgovic just really hasn't kicked on, that the development has stalled, and he really hasn't developed into the sort of fighter that people think he should be. I think he's definitely fallen in love with his power, and he seems to think that he's going to bang everyone out. And sometimes that's not possible. But in the meantime, if guys are winning rounds and you're not catching them, you're at a serious disadvantage of losing a fight at the upper level. Remembering, Demsey McKean is roughly a top 30 fighter. Filip Hrgovic, for large stretches of this fight, looked on the same level. He didn't look like the guy that was maybe somewhere around top 10 to top 15. He was the guy that had the pedigree and was expected to win, and win relatively well. Let's face it, Demsey McKean's record, especially since he joined Matchroom, he's fought basically no one. So these guys were both inactive. McKean hadn't been fighting anyone of note, and you had Hrgovic coming off a performance where he looked so-so against Zhang Jilei almost a year ago. And in that fight, arguably he lost that one. A lot of people thought that he was lucky to get it, the decision there. So you have a case where another southpaw, another so-so performance, although he got the stoppage late on, and people sort of scratching their heads going, what chance does this guy have against Alexander Usyk? And based off what we've seen, if Usyk can get past Dubois and then that fight against Hrgovic is next, Usyk will be the massive favourite against Filip Hrgovic. It sort of seems like he has stagnated. He looked rusty. His conditioning was not great in this one, and it's a massive question mark and red flag. If you've got Alexander Usyk boxing circles around you, using those angles in his footwork, potentially not going to end well for Filip Hrgovic. And like I say, if this was an audition for him, to show people he was ready for that title fight, I'm not sure he actually passed the test. As someone said to me on social media, look, a win is a win. At the end of the day, that's true, but also for this sort of fight, against this level of fighter, Hrgovic should have done better. McKean, he was okay, and the hugging and the holding was certainly nullifying Hrgovic and some of what he wanted to do. But Hrgovic just looked unmotivated, uninterested, and for multiple rounds, he didn't look like the guy that was meant to be a cut above. So you have to ask the question, what's he going to do? What can he change? What's going to go better? Or is he going to be able to have some sort of quick turnaround, brush off more ring rust, make sure that whatever he's doing in the gym can translate to the ring? And also he's got that kind of weird setup where he's training with Ronnie Shields and also Pedro Diaz, splitting time. I don't quite understand that, but we can't really say it's failed at this point because he's still unbeaten. But there are certainly enough warning signs to say that Filip Hrgovic, once he gets to that top echelon in the heavyweight division, maybe will not fulfill the potential that he's got, that we believe that he had a few years ago. I'm not seeing any development of anything. In some areas, he looks like he's regressed. So, a lot of people who followed the channel for a long time know that I was very big on Filip Hrgovic coming out of the amateurs. He was one of my top couple of prospects. I thought, yeah, this guy can probably go all the way. I'm certainly rethinking that based off what we've seen in recent performances. I think he's always going to be a guy that's going to be there or thereabouts as a contender who's going to give you a tough fight and not going to be an easy fight. But he seems to have lost some of that X factor, which, early on he looked like he had. What'd you make of it all? Drop a comment. Loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter. Boxing_squared. I'm out.